Once again to a homily reflection, this one for the 30th Sunday of Ordinary Time. We'll listen to a reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a scholar of the law, tested him by asking, "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." The whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. I don't know if you've heard, there's some elections coming up, and I've received several emails this last week in the context of these elections, and perhaps this also most unpleasant time of pandemic, pleading that I speak from the pulpit and speak boldly about how our faith should guide our decisions. The implication is that I should try to guide our congregation on how to vote, or maybe even straighten you out ahead of these elections. So here goes. In today's gospel, we hear the greatest commandment of Jesus. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. How do we fulfill this first and greatest commandment? Well, St. Thomas Aquinas, teaching about the second commandment, loving our neighbor, seems clear to me. Love is to do the will, or is to rather to will the good of the other as other. In other words, when I love a friend, it's my desire to act in a way for that person's good. I want to make whatever sacrifice I can to enhance the life of the other. I act not for myself. The person I love is other, that is not me. And the more I can act only for that person's good and not mine, the more perfect does my love become. So that's love of neighbor. What about love of God? For God's life does not need to be enhanced by anything I do. God needs nothing from us, his creations, for God is already all sufficient in himself. It's for this reason that Jesus quickly ties the first commandment to the second one. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. This is how we love God, by loving his beloved ones. In other words, my choice to will the good of others, loving my neighbor as other because they're beloved of God, perfects my love of God and fulfills the great commandment to love God. I love God perfectly when I love his beloved. I recently saw a story of a radiant vision of human love that so reminded me of God's love for you and me that I feel it might be a clue on how the two great commandments of today's gospel are lived. The story comes from Aberdeen, Scotland, where in the backyard of their home, 70-year-old Anne Duncan married 72-year-old Bill Duncan for a second time. The couple had first married 13 years ago. Several years after their first wedding, Anne began to notice that Bill was forgetting things and acting strange. A trip to the doctor revealed that Bill was in the early stages of dementia, and since that time, Anne has been caring for her husband as he slowly but relentlessly has lost his memories and finds it hard to communicate. Finally, Bill even has forgotten that Anne was his wife. But then this year, a miracle happened. But because of her care for him, he began to see her as his new girlfriend and began to ask Anne if she would marry him, having forgotten that she was already his wife. Finally, Anne said, "Okay, that would be lovely, Bill." So this last month, though Bill did not recall that he had already been married to Anne for 13 years, the couple renewed their wedding vows. With the course of dementia, Anne feared that Bill would too forget his second marriage, but to her surprise, he has been so affected and impressed by the wedding that he persists 2 months later in remembering that Anne is his wife. What the future holds, no human knows. Yet Anne intends to love her husband 2 times over until the end. Whether he remembers who she is and with diminished ability to reciprocate her love, she will continue to remember him and love him. Her love has saved him and will continue to do so. That sounds like God's love to me. For St. John says in his first letter, "Beloved, let us love one another because love comes from God." The question of love and how we are to love God and neighbor begins with the love of God poured into our hearts from that perfect love itself, so that we can then love others with the love of God for the sake of the beloved and not ourselves, just as God, who needs nothing from us, loves us simply into life for our sakes. Does Anne Duncan love with the divine love? I don't really know what her religious motives are, but in her choice to love Bill, who will likely struggle to reciprocate her love and might even forget who she is, in doing this, Anne persists in her love for his good. Just as we can forget that we are beloved of God, and just as we often do not love perfectly or at all, yet God's love for us is persistent and undimmed no matter what. It seems with our political leaders yelling ugly things at one another, it's a most unlovely time. This is, in the end, not important. What is important and what lasts is love. First, love that comes from God, or else it'll be ruled by self-interest, and then love that we are to take and share for the sake of others, for their good. When we do, not only do we fill the world with love, but we save the world, and boy, does the world need saving. So let's go and smash the hopelessness that's all around us by receiving love and giving love, by choosing and willing the good of others, and doing whatever we can to enhance the lives of others. This other focus, perfectly revealed in Jesus Christ and his journey to the cross and then to this altar where we share the Eucharist, is the saving perspective our love-starved world longs for. When others have forgotten they are beloved, it is our duty and our mission to show them they are wrong, solely for their sakes. When we love, not to get life, but to give it, we fulfill the great commandments of Jesus and fulfill the law of love. Like the Lord, then, let's keep our eyes fixed on others and what they need for life, and let's love them, will their good in word and deed, right there in the midst of their need. Then and only then will this troubled world be saved. Love of God and neighbor, if this guides our actions and choices, that will straighten things out. God bless you all.